All right, we'll wrap it up with this team, and certainly taking the low hanging fruit here. But I mean, we have to talk about these guys, and that of course is the Edmonton Oilers, who going into this season, I mean, rightfully so, all thought were a Stanley Cup contender. I think we're all still waiting and saying, just wait. It's the Oilers. They've got, the two best players on the planet. And they're going to figure this out and get this thing back on the tracks. They're the only team so far to fire a head coach at this point in the season. Chris Knobloch took over, of course, for Jay Woodcroft, who had just an amazing record with the Oilers. But look, I mean, they're not just out of it; they're out of it by quite a bit so far to start the season. 5-11-1, 8 points behind Seattle, who sits in that fourth spot in the Pacific. I watched that game the other night in Florida, and obviously the goaltending sticks out like a sore thumb. You've got Jack Campbell, who is still struggling in the American Hockey League, and I think the message to him was, go down to the AHL and find your game. And I think we were all expecting Campbell to have a pretty quick stint in the AHL and maybe be back up by now. I don't think that's a stretch at all, but clearly it's not happening anytime soon. I thought Pickard played well the other night. Skinner had 3 wins in a row there. It was looking better, but that's come down a little bit. So obviously goaltending is an issue. Defensive breakdowns too. And not going to go into specifics about that, but I just look at this blue line, and when you look at contenders like Vegas and Colorado, for example, Tampa as well, Edmonton doesn't have that one guy on the blue line. They don't. Like Vegas has Pietrangelo. I mean, you could throw Theodore in there as well. Colorado has Makar, obviously, and they have Taves and other guys. Then Hedman and Sergachev and in Tampa, just to name a few. But you've got a blue line that I think is very expensive and not very good. And obviously it starts with Darnell Nurse at over $9 million. You've got CC at 3.25, Kulak at 2.75, even though when they signed him to that deal, it looked pretty good at the time. Ekholm is a good defenseman, but at this time in his career, he's not a number one. And I know that he fit in really well, but he's on the wrong side of 30. And so you're going to have some regression there. So that is the next thing for me. And then it's the lack of depth. Connor Brown, 0 points in 11 games. I know he was coming off of a big surgery in the offseason. He barely played at all last year in Washington, but that really sticks out like a sore thumb. And especially when your two big dogs up front in McDavid and Draisaitl are struggling and not going well, say struggling, even though McDavid's numbers are still pretty good. They're not McDavid level so far to start the season, but a couple of goals the other night, but you can see Draisaitl struggling. Just, I look at some of these names, the depth just, it's not good enough. Sam Gagner, Adam Ernie, Fogle, Ryan, like some of these guys, like what are you expecting from these guys when your two top players aren't going? And so outside of, when it comes to the forward group, outside of the two obvious ones, Nuge, who obviously you're not expecting to have over 100 points again this season, Kane and Hyman, there's not really much there. So, and like, what kind of response is this from Ken Holland, from a general manager? I think he's the one who said it in that press conference when they made the coaching change. Well, the roster wasn't deep enough, or the roster isn't deep enough to sit guys. What kind of response is that? Like, I know the cap is tight and whatever, but like, you can't have that.
You built it,
just
Kenny.
Can't.
You built it.
Yeah.
you know?
So anyway, that's my rant on the Oilers, and I know I got rambling on there a little bit, but want to get your thoughts on Edmonton before we wrap up. And obviously, there are other teams that we could talk about, but like the Oilers are right at the top of the list because going into this season, we were thinking like cup or bust for these guys, and it's gone completely the other way. It's absolutely shocking. But when you're looking at this roster from top to bottom, it's really not constructed very well.
I think that when I look at this team, I see a team full of guys that are gripping the stick so tight they're about to break it in half. And that's something that's plaguing the whole team, top to bottom, including McDavid and Draisaitl, who have not been themselves. And I think a lot of it stems from the Canadian media, the Canadian hockey media in particular, because they're just constantly hammering them with negativity and in the spotlight of the media, as well as in the dressing room, with just ridiculous question after question after question. And it's got to be weighing on these guys. These are guys who expect the best out of themselves every single night, and all they hear about is the worst. So I have to think that this is a team that's an absolute head case at the moment. And although I agree with the firing of Woodcroft, I don't think that bringing an NHL rookie in to try to fix a team that's in their heads was the right move. I don't pay that much attention to coaching in the first place, but that's one thing I know is that you need a guy with a strong voice to come in and fix a team like that. I think they do have a lot going for them in terms of the goaltending can be better. I think Skinner can be better. It was good for my fantasy team to see them lose with Picard and net the other night. But it's the PDO stat that I mentioned before, the shooting percentage plus save percentage, which is second last in the league. It's the luck stat. And this team has been so unlucky. And I think a lot of it has to do with them being in their heads.
Yeah. Well, and Case, to build off your point there about coaching, not to sound like an absolute boomer, but I totally agree. I think not only do you need to bring a guy in who has a strong voice, I think you need to bring a guy in who's been there and done that over his career. And I disagreed with the Woodcroft firing in the first place, but then to replace him with a rookie who coached McDavid in junior, like, to me, I thought that was a terrible hire. Not anything against the guy, but even, in his introductory press conference, the guy was shedding a tear. And it's like, listen, I get it. He's a human. It's emotional. Like, you're getting hired. You reached the point of what you were ultimately trying to get to in the NHL as a coach. But to me, I think they just needed a stronger voice, a calming presence.
He should be an NHL coach. I'm not denying that. I just don't think that this was the time or the team.
Exactly.
I couldn't imagine being a team that's supposed to be winning cups, struggling, bottom of the league, and they're like, hey, we need to bring in a rookie coach for you. I'd be expecting someone who's won a cup. That's what I'd be expecting if I was Connor McDavid.
Yeah. To me, like, the cup doesn't even matter that much. I think you just need a guy who has done it and can say, like, hey, listen, guys, when I did this, a decade ago with this team, this is how we got out of this funk. Or, when I had a similar situation 5 years ago for this other team, this is how we got out of it. Like, trust yourselves, you're good players, blah, blah, blah. Like, obviously, I'm not a psychologist by any means, and neither are coaches, but I think that sometimes you just need that calming presence of, like, okay, you're not the first people on the planet to go through this issue. You're not the first team to have, confidence issues, scoring issues, goaltending issues, and, let's work on this together and get out of it. So I didn't agree with the Woodcroft firing in the first place. I thought that he was kind of really tied to this team in a way, and I thought that they would get out of it together, but he wasn't really given an opportunity to do that. All of that being said, obviously, this doesn't come down to coaching. This comes down mostly to goaltending, which has been abysmal this season, which kind of goes back as well to roster construction by the general manager, which we've talked about forever. How long have McDavid and Draisaitl been on this team with inadequate depth, defense, and goaltending? It seems like their entire careers, right? And we're just seeing it this year on display even more because their absolute best players are playing to their standards, or by their standards, pretty average. I think McDavid is just now at a point per game, 15 and 15. And I think Draisaitl has like something like 20, 22 and 15 or something, or 20 and 15 or in 17. But the point is, like, it goes to show how valuable these two players are to this team. And when they're not going, it really, really exposes the roster construction. I think that's really what has happened. And it's a shame. But all of that being said, I wanted to mention the same number that I did for the other teams that we were talking about too. They currently have 11 points in 17 games. To reach that magic number 93 in points, they need 82 in their next 65. And of the teams that we talked about, the 4 teams, Edmonton, Minnesota, Nashville, and the Blue Jackets, the Oilers are the team I'd be willing to bet on that have a chance to make the playoffs.
Oh, Money Puck has them at a 44.5% chance of making the playoffs. So
that's crazy. Like they could be in that 15%, right, of teams who are outside of the playoffs at American Thanksgiving by 4 or more points. Hart, That's a complicated stat, the way like to say it every time, but like it's a good one. So
at this time last year, I think the Devils were halfway through like a 14-game winning streak. So if you're telling me the Edmonton Oilers can't do that with Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, I don't know.
Well, exactly, and I think that it was part of me was kind of accepting or not expecting them to go on a big run like that when Chris Knobloch took over. They won 3 games in a row, very emotional, of course, after his first win, and it looked better. But then the last couple of games, I mean, they've put up 3 or 4 goals, and it just hasn't been enough. They're not getting the saves, and you're still seeing some defensive breakdowns. And over time too, I don't think it's insignificant that Paul Coffey is on the bench as well. I mean, talk about a guy who's been through it all and one of the best defensemen to ever play. And what we did see at first, and we'll see if this is an ongoing trend, is kind of a less is more approach with this back end, taking some of the weight off of a guy like Darnell Nurse and Matthias Ekholm and just kind of spreading things out a little bit. Because like we've said, with the way this roster is constructed, and I know a lot of the problems have been because they haven't been getting saves, but it's the back end as well, and defensive breakdowns and all of that. They just don't have that one guy. So I think that less is more is a good approach moving forward with the blue line of this team. But yeah, I mean, out of all of these teams that we've talked about, if there's anyone that can come back from this and get back into the playoffs here and save their season and go on a run, it's the Oilers for sure. And again, I know it's hard to compare, but look at the St. Louis Blues in 2019. I mean, they were last in the league in January and went on to win the Stanley Cup. So you just never know. But if there's anyone that can do it, it's these guys.
They should trade for Jordan Binnington then, if they want to do that. Really.
I think that this is the team that, if they do have this, miracle of a comeback and make the playoffs, like maybe then they win the cup, because they're just that the momentum of that would be just like the St. Louis Blues, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I actually think, like we were talking about roster construction, I actually think their back end and their top 6 is the best maybe it's ever been in McDavid and Draisaitl's stint in Edmonton. I think their goaltending had the potential to be good, but I feel like we're just realizing the flaws because McDavid and Draisaitl aren't playing out of their minds, right? But I don't think this team is actually, like, when you look at them on paper, like it's a pretty good team. It is minus the goaltending. So I think, like, and I've said this before on previous episodes, I think they should just overpay for a goalie. Not on a long-term contract overpay, but overpay in a trade. Like, just get a guy who can stop pucks right now. Like, and then worry about your goaltending contracts down the road. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, that is the talk that we've been hearing that's starting to happen there. And at first it's been, no, no, like we're not making a move that we're going to lose by a country mile for a goaltender. But at the same time, you have to go for it if you're the Oilers with these two guys and the contracts that are going to be coming up here with McDavid and Draisaitl in a couple of years. So and you know I kind of ripped the depth a little bit in that. I'm just saying it's really, when you look at it, when McDavid and Draisaitl aren't going the way we're used to, I just think that, you know, it's just not enough. Like, there are not enough guys there to pick up the slack. And, you know, a guy like Connor Brown in particular, I just can't believe how he's been invisible. It's
pretty sure they just paid him $3 million for playing the game on Sunday or Monday.
Played his 10th game, or was it the 11th game of the season? Maybe the clause was like play more than 10. But yeah, paid him $3 million. That doesn't count against the cap until next season. Jeez. So even if he doesn't re-sign in Edmonton, I believe, I would have to double check this, but I believe that bonus money will be on their cap next season, even if Connor Brown is playing for a different team.
I do want to mention quickly too,
why'd they play him? Like, why'd they play him in that game? Why wouldn't they just like scratch him until they're confident that I don't know. It's weird, man.
Scratch him for the rest of the season,
or trade him, or like send him down. And I don't know.
I wanted to mention too, like, the drafting has been an issue with this team as well. They have not hit on a lot of picks. I mean, Holloway, we're still waiting on, but he's injured again, and certainly injuries are an issue with him. Lavoie was a second rounder. I think he made his NHL debut, but we've been waiting on him for a while. It seems like Broberg, same thing. We've been waiting on him for a while. You know, all of these things kind of catch up to you. But they've been kind of put in the rearview mirror because of the way their stars go, and they've been a playoff team every year, and they made it to the Final Four a couple of years ago. But I think that those things contribute to a start like this, in my opinion, and that's why I wanted to kind of bring up the roster construction and some of the missed draft picks and all of that, because I feel like not a lot of that is being talked about right now when it comes to the problems that exist for the Edmonton Oilers. And I should mention as well that Ken Holland is in the final year of his contract.
Yeah, well, do you want to hear some of the misses? You know, like, I know you guys know this, but 2016, so these are all the drafts after drafting Leon at 3 in 2014 and McDavid at 1 in 2015. So first rounder, 4th overall, Puljujarvi. First rounder in 2017, Yamamoto. First rounder in 2018, Evan Bouchard, who is the one that has stuck around and has been really good.
Yep.
First rounder in 2019, Broberg. First rounder in 2020, Holloway. First rounder in 2021, Bourgault. First rounder in 2022, Reed Schaefer. And then they didn't have a first rounder.
Who was traded to Nashville in the Ekholm deal. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, and then like
Bourgault was still young, but there's no guarantee there either. So,
well, and I remember Bourgault being an off the board pick anyways. It seems like they always do that. But then if you just look at the other prospects that they have, like, no one else has really even played any games. Like Ryan McLeod, I guess, and Stuart Skinner are the only two really since 2015 that are still on the team playing games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, historically, this team hasn't had much luck in the first round, but so maybe they should just trade those picks for a goalie.
There you go, Jordan Binnington.
Picks. Dude,
you know, other than the McDavid and finally RNH and, you know.
Okay, Edmonton, do what Tampa did last year and trade your entire draft class for Tanner Jeannot, or close to it.
Third line winger.
Except for Jeannot, make it for a good goaltender. There you go.
Or you should try trading one of your better forwards for a defenseman 1-for-1 again. I'm sure that'll work out.
That'll work out for sure. I don't know, man. I see some goalies in situations around the league. Like, look what a guy like Korpisalo did last year for LA. You know, like, You trade for a goalie because you desperately needed it. He stabilized the position for you, and then, you know, got you into the playoffs. And I know they didn't get very far, but it's just at this point you need to start winning games, and your goalies aren't stopping any pucks. So you need to do something. Overpay. It doesn't matter. What's your team without McDavid and Draisaitl? Like literally nothing. We're seeing that this season. It's not good enough to make the playoffs without those two. So you may only have 2 years left with both of those players on your roster. Trade for a goalie. Overpay. Who cares?